I was going to mention we are going to be we're recording this session. Thank you, Molly. So this session is brought to you by the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. I am a consultant doing work with the board on various initiatives across the state of Wisconsin. Excited to have a longtime colleague of mine do this presentation with us. I'll introduce her in a second, but I wanted to give Molly Cooney from the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities an opportunity to introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Shannon. My name is Molly Cooney with the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. You've now heard that like 4 or 5 times so far. I work on our employment projects, and we are super excited that there's so many people interested in learning about asset-based community development. So thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Yeah, so a couple of housekeeping details. You know, we're going to have upwards of 100, maybe more people on this session. So please stay muted if you can. If for some reason you pop off mute, we'll probably mute you. You know, that we are going to have an interactive session. There's going to be some things put in the chat that you'll interact with. We'll also have a few times where we have breakout rooms, and that'll involve, you know, being with just 2 other people in a breakout room. So during the times that you're in those breakout rooms and having conversation with, you know, other like-minded people who are learning about asset-based community development, we'd like you to keep your cameras on and participate for sure in those breakout meetings. But, you know, as we move along, you can certainly put questions, comments in the chat. We'll make time to address those. And I'm trying to think, I think that's just about it for housekeeping details. We're recording this. I will send the PowerPoint out and the recording after this session. We have a second session that we will be doing, you know, November, right? Is that right? Yep, November. I don't have the date right off.
October.
Maybe it's October.
October 28th.
That's right. Thank you. So hopefully you will all come back for that second session to continue learning with us as we learn more and implement strategies around asset-based community development, ABCD. Okay, it's just about as hard to say as the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. So anyway, I'm super pleased to bring to you a longtime colleague of mine. I've known Deb for about 15 years or so, since our little girls were little, I think, just, you know, toddlers and or big girls, I should say. Anyway, Deb Wisniewski, she is a fellow, I'm sorry, a faculty member at the Asset-Based Community Development Institute in DePaul, out of DePaul University. You know, she has focused, I worked with her years ago on what was called our Medicaid infrastructure grant projects here in Wisconsin, because we did have a focus on asset-based community development and inclusion of people with disabilities in those projects. So I got a chance to work with Deb as we did training across the state and consulted with managed care organizations and provider organizations. And so this was well over 10 years ago. And so I thought it was about time. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, community development and whatnot, especially as we come back to community, you know, during COVID, or at least we're trying to get back there and reconnect people with disabilities to their communities. So we decided that it would be great to bring Deb into our Employment First conference this past May. So some of you may have had an opportunity to meet her and be part of that session at the Employment First conference and hear some 101 about asset-based community development. But, you know, that was just kind of a tip of the iceberg. So we wanted to have her back, and we realized that many of you that are joining today didn't get that 101. So we're going to provide a little bit of more background on ABCD, and then she'll kind of launch into this next phase of helping you understand what that is. So but just a couple other things about Deb. You know, she has a background in diversity and inclusion. Like I said, her focus with the ABCD Institute has been on neighborhood and community development, but she does have a niche with rural community development. So if there's any particular, in Wisconsin being a very rural state, any particular challenges or questions that you have, Deb could be a resource for those. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deb. Thanks, Deb.
All right, thank you very much. Hold on one second. My screen just went a little goofy. Of course, the minute I'm ready to talk, my screen goes goofy on me. There we go. All right, I'm gonna share my screen and hope this all goes well here. All right, you should be seeing a full screen slide of me underwater. Is that what you're seeing? I hope so. If you don't, somebody give me a shout out, okay?
Oh, looks great.
I'm Deb Wisniewski. Great. I'm Deb Wisniewski, as Shannon said, and I've been doing this kind of work actually now for about 15 or 16 years, I think, is when I started my consulting and started working with a variety of organizations. Yeah, so Shannon and I go back a bit. Kind of fun to think of our big girls being little girls. Anyway, I lived for a great deal of my adult life in Madison, but over the last 3.5 years, I've been living actually up in Door County. And one of the areas I'm really interested in is rural communities and how do we think about rural communities from an asset perspective. So yeah, that is a particular interest of mine. So as we're going through this, you're going to be thinking about how does this all apply to where you live and what you're doing. So certainly some folks are here from urban places. Some people are here from suburban or rural areas. So we'll just move forward with thinking about this from whatever space you're in. I'd like to just stop for a minute. I always find it's really good to sort of stop and center ourselves when we're starting into a workshop like this. There's a lot going on out there. There's a lot going on in each of our lives. And I think just stopping and taking a breath and just being in this place and opening ourselves to the learning that we want to gain from this experience today. So thank you all for being here today. And thank you for welcoming me here to be with you. At the beginning of my workshops, I like to do what's known as a land acknowledgement. I'm not sure how many other workshops in the US do that these days. I actually learned about this idea from some friends and colleagues in Australia. And I think it's really lovely to stop and acknowledge the land that we are on, each of us, wherever we are. And to think about the traditional custodians of the land, wherever we are. So I live up in Door County, the area I live in. Historically, it was members of the Potawatomi Nation that lived here. And so in acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land, wherever we are, we recognize and acknowledge their continuing connection to the land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. I also like to kick off workshops with this poem that was shared by a colleague of mine called Invitation to Brave Space. We always talk about having safe spaces for workshops, being able to talk about what we need to talk about, share ideas, whatever. And my friend Melissa Browning introduced this poem to me, which is called An Invitation to Brave Space. And I'll just read this quickly out loud. Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. And that's by Mickey Scott Faye Jones. So in the spirit of being a brave space, I just want to share some agreements here that I think are really great to, to have us all in the same place, if you will, in this brave space together. So showing up, we're going to do our best to show up on time, minimize outside distractions when we're together. I totally acknowledge that we have kids, we have dogs, we have neighbors, partners, people doing construction on our house, all those fun things. But we're going to do our best to show up on time and, show up with our full self. We're going to be learning together. So this is a place for learning. And as such, the idea about listening, looking for connections, participating, this workshop means that we want you to participate. There's going to be a number of different ways for you to do that, one of which is the ongoing chat. So if you have questions or if you have thoughts, feel free to share them in the chat. Even if we don't acknowledge them immediately, we are seeing your thoughts, we are hearing you, and other people in the group are also doing that as well. And if there's questions, I'll try to take them where they seem to fit in best with what we're doing at the time. And at the end, there will also be additional time for questions. Okay. We're going to be using we're going to be using something called a mentee. So if you haven't done that before, that's a lot of fun. We'll tell you how to do that when we get closer to that. Be in charge of your own learning. What I mean by that is, it's real easy to sit and listen to information and say, oh, they're not telling me how to do that at where I work, though. This isn't about the place where I work or the work that I do. So being in charge of your own learning means to take the information that's being shared, and that's not just from me, that's from your colleagues, from the other participants in the webinar or the workshop today. Take those ideas and really think about where those connections are and how it applies to what you're doing, both in your work and in your life. A lot of people who think about ABCD find that it has just as much, if not more of an impact on their own personal lives as it does on their work lives. And then finally, take care of yourself. This is a good chunk of time. This is 2 hours. We're going to 3 o'clock Central Time. And if you need to take a break, if you need to stand up, stretch, run and get a drink, whatever you need to do, take care of yourself. We just hope that you'll stick it out with us for the whole time. Okay. So now that we've told you a little bit about ourselves, we're going to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about you. And I think Shannon or wait a minute. Oh, I gotta, before you click on this link, hold on one second. Hold on one second. I've got to open up one more thing, sorry. And start something else here. There we go. Put that. All right, so let me go back to that slide. There it is. Okay. So Shannon's put this link, and if you click on that link in your chat, or if you just type it into your computer, I want to know who you are when you are not working. So this is really important when you're not working, and you get to choose like one, 2, or 3 different descriptions for yourself. Try to keep each description to 1 to 2 words. Some people are already jumping right in here. So things like bookworm, mom, wife, and enter them into the mentee. Couch potato. I'll go over and I'm going to share that screen so you can see the results of that. Let me just go and switch over. All right, you can see we're creating a word cloud with what you've entered. And like all word clouds, the things that are used the most wind up bigger, and the things that are used, fewer times are smaller. So mom is a big one so far. And I can tell people are loading up. If you see down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a number there. So we have 50 people who've entered stuff so far, and it's going up quickly. I'll give you a minute to do that. I realize some people may not be able to access that if you're on your phone or whatever. And some folks have entered theirs directly into the chat. Are you guys seeing the cloud, or are you seeing my screen? Sure, which one
We
you're
see the
seeing.
cloud now. Oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, just
Okay,
early on the.
Yeah, I had to switch it over. All right. Oh yeah, I can see everyone's seeing that now. Still adding a few more. I see we've got about 68 people that have shared so far. And I see some people have put them in the chat because they don't have access. So I see people who say, I work 24/7. Oh no, but you're somebody else, aren't you? March watcher, a March watcher, a mom, wife, lifetime movie watcher. Oh, a March watcher. Okay, thanks, David. Wasn't sure about that. A parent, mom, sister, outdoor lover, avid reader, hard worker, weary parent, have fun, take trips, a trip taker. So there's lots of fun stuff in this word cloud. I see, things like foodie and gamer and family member, listener, soon to be grandma. Oh, congratulations to the soon to be grandma. Chicken obsessed. I love it. Chicken obsessed. So I'll be sure and make a screenshot of this and share it with all of you when we share out the PowerPoint and the resources. So let me stop sharing that for a moment. And give me just a second to get back to my PowerPoint. So as I open this up again, I have to do my share. Where'd it go? It's always tricky to me how I share this. It'll go there, I think. You're just going to see really pretty stuff for a minute here. Do you see my slide again?
Yes, we do.
Somebody can, thank you. All right, so it's really exciting when you think about that, all the different ways and all the different cool people that we are besides our work. So I want you to think about that, because all of those things that you shared express aspects of yourself, gifts that you have, talents that you might share with people. So now I'm going to have you go back to the same link, and I'm going to, in just a moment, just give me a moment before you go and do this one. I'm going to ask you to only choose one this time about what your primary focus at work is. And hold on while I get there for you. Where'd it go? Obviously, I'm not as smooth as I would like to be here. Hold on. As soon as I open this up, you'll be able to answer the second question.
I just put the link for that in the chat.
Thank you. All right, let me share this one. You can go ahead and enter it now. About who are you at work and what's your primary focus? So if you work for an agency that has multiple programs and services, pick the one that that is the primary focus of your position. All right, so I see there's some others in there, and people are posting the others in the chat, like post-secondary transition is one of the others. Job developer. Director of programs. In what area, Jessica, are you director of programs? Are there multiple areas, or I'll give you a minute to respond to that, Jessica. All right, so I think we have a lot of people that have responded. Okay, so multiple, Jessica has multiple services she provided. All right, and there's some folks that have multiple areas they're in charge of, and that happens, right? So you can see from this donut that there's quite a variety of people on this call today. And so this is why when I was talking about earlier about being in charge of your own learning, you really want to pay attention to thinking about how does this apply where you work. I'm going to tell you right now, I worked in the disability field, working with disability services for a long time, for most of my adult life. And I am not the expert on what you do. Each and every one of you has a unique role, has a unique relationship to the people that are supported through your work and through your agency's work. So what I want you to do is take what we're talking about and think about how does it apply in the situations where you are. Okay, I'll go back to my, just get on. Back to my PowerPoint again. Okay. All right, so I just want to review real quickly that we are going to have 2 workshops. This is the first one. And although it was not articulated on the announcement, we really felt that as Molly and Shannon had said earlier, it really is about asset-based community development being the foundation of what we're going to be doing together as a group during this workshop and the next one. So a lot of this first workshop is going to dive into aspects of ABCD. What is it? What are the 6 assets, 3 characteristics? How is it different from a needs-based approach? That kind of information. And we're going to dive into some of the assets specifically. If you've heard my presentations before this, there are some different parts here. We're diving a little deeper into this stuff. Definitely we're diving deeper into it than I had talked about at the employment conference back in May. So I'm hoping that for the people who haven't had this presentation, you'll be able to, or this, learned about this. This will give you a good foundation, and for the rest of us, it'll just cement a common foundation for all of us. So we're gonna really focus primarily on that area today, and we're gonna be talking about discovering people's gifts and what you do with those gifts. And throughout both workshops, we're going to be talking about the value of relationships, right? And also, I try to really think about making it as practical as possible too. But here's where your job comes in again. How does this apply? How could you use this in your setting? Okay. And then next time we'll be diving in a little deeper on asset mapping and what is asset mapping and how is it different from a resource directory, and how do you actually use that to help people make connections? I want to mention that we had quite a number of really good questions that were submitted through the registration process. All the questions that were submitted were really great. There were a few that are really kind of outside the scope of what these 2 workshops are. So for example, how to bill for services. We're not going to get into that aspect of it here, but Shannon and Molly both have your questions. So, and if there's more questions that don't get addressed today, again, we'll have those questions to think about as people move forward and plan for future learning opportunities. All right, so this is the basic dilemma that we look at when we talk about ABCD. And it's the way we think about people, and it's the way we think about communities, right? So we can think about people as being deficient, having needs. We can think about them in terms of their labels, right? Their negative labels. Or we can think about them in terms of their skills and talents. If we look at a neighborhood, for example, and we're thinking about it from a needs perspective, I bet if I ask for a show of hands, almost everybody out there has been involved somehow in a grant proposal, right? And the first thing you do in a grant proposal is you have to do a needs statement, right? Or explain the needs that you are meeting. And when we talk about neighborhoods from a needs perspective, when we talk about people from a needs perspective, we're talking about focusing on what they can't do or what's wrong with them. I'd like people to jump on the chat and give me some thoughts about what happens to people and what happens to neighborhoods when we only talk about them from a needs perspective, when we talk about what's wrong with them and focus on the problem. Can some people share their thoughts on that in the chat? I'll give you a minute to type in. Labels, demoralizing, stereotypes, things don't change. Oh yeah, we got lots of stuff. Negative connotations, negative, disempowered, nothing gets fixed, lack of hope, right? Decrease of self-esteem, hopelessness. That's a huge one. You know, why should I even try if all we ever do is hear about our problems? A lack of motivation. Thanks for bringing that one up. We're going to be talking about that a little bit today, but we'll be talking about it a lot more next time too. We tend to do everything for them and not let them help themselves. That's a really good point. We tend to think, you know, there's both that they can't do it as well as that protection or I have to take care of them. I like to say that out of the kindness of our hearts, so many of us come to this field as chronic caretakers, right? As people who, I admit it, you know, that's how I came to the field of working with people who have labels of disability, because I wanted to help people take care of people. And without realizing it, I was actually protecting them in ways that they really didn't want to be protected. Thank you very much. So lots of great comments there. Thanks. So what is ABCD then? You know, I like to say it's not rocket science. You know, when we think about communities and we think about approaching and looking at people from an asset perspective, from a gifted perspective, a strengths perspective, rather than a deficit or a needs perspective, we start to think about people differently. We start to think about neighborhoods differently. And so it's a real simple concept. I mean, I could basically say, this is it. This is ABCD. Now go off and do good work. But we're going to get a little deeper than that. So one of the things is that one of the ways to think about ABCD is that it builds on the skills. First of all, it builds on the skills of local residents. So individuals that you work with are residents of communities, right? So it starts with people, right? It doesn't start with systems. It doesn't start with big institutions. It doesn't start with, you know, what we typically think of as stakeholders. I hear people use that word stakeholders, and they often leave out the people that are most affected, the people that receive services or have labels on them. And in fact, we always start with the skills, passions, interests of individuals and local residents. The second thing is the power of local associations. And we're going to be talking more about associations. But in a nutshell, I describe those as the networks of relationships between people in communities. And then, and only then, do we get to that third item on here, the supportive functions of local institutions. So, you know, local institutions are the service systems. They are the nonprofits, they're the businesses, they're the government entities. And those are three, actually right there, we have 3 of the 6 assets of ABCD. And we'll be talking about those 3 in more depth, plus I'll explain the second set of 3. So it draws upon, ABC draws upon those community strengths. And as a result, we have stronger, more sustainable communities for the future. So what I like to say is that our communities need everybody, not just the people that have the most power, or the people that are perceived as being the most gifted or the most talented or that have the most resources. But people who are traditionally labeled or who are at the edges of our communities, we need them. We need them to make our communities more stronger and more sustainable. Another way to think about this, this phrase, discoverables, not deliverables, I borrowed from my friend and colleague, Diamond Hargis from Indianapolis. He talks about getting rid of the idea of deliverables and thinking about discoverables. What can we discover? So we can discover gifts. We can discover the gifts of individuals. We can discover the assets of a community that those individuals live in. We can discover what motivates them to share their gifts. And then we, all of us on this call today, are in the unique role of helping to make the connections, helping people connect to the assets and using their gifts and what they're motivated to do to make their community stronger and better. The 3 characteristics of ABCD. Let me just grab a drink here. The first one's the obvious one. It's asset-based. So we start with what's there and not what's not there. It doesn't mean we ignore the empty part of the glass, but that's not what we start with. We start with what are the assets in this community. It's internally focused. You know, if you think of concentric circles, you know, or a target radiating out, it starts on the center, the heart of that community, and focuses on the agenda building, or the agenda building and the problem solving capacities of those local residents, their associations, and the local institutions. And the third one for me is one of the most important ones. You're going to hear me use the word relationship a lot, and I want you to think about it in terms of relationships. It's relationship driven, because I really believe that it's relationships that are the ultimate building blocks of strong communities. So ABCD seeks to really build, rebuild, recognize, support those relationships. So again, as you're thinking about the people that you support, the people that you care about in your life that are not connected or have minimal connections, you want to think about where are those relationships and how can I support them? These are the 6 types of assets that we talk about. The first 3 are the 3 that I mentioned that we'll dive a little deeper into. The fourth one is the physical assets of a community, both human-made and nature-made. It could be a building, it could be an empty lot, it could be, so many of us in Wisconsin are blessed to live near lakes or streams or rivers, to have parks around. Economic assets are anything of value that is exchanged within a community. So it could be businesses and work, when people are able to work in their communities. It could be also sort of barter systems where, you know, when my daughter was younger, we had basically an informal children co-op, babysitting co-op, where I took care of my friend's daughter once a week while they were working, and they took care of our daughter once a week while we were working. But the 6th one is culture and stories, which is stories are as Jody Kretzman would say, stories are a neighborhood's way or a community's way of knowing itself. And that's true of individuals, and that's true of communities. And culture is wherever people come together, how do people relate to each other within their community? You know, so they could be stories of history, they could be traditions of festivals that go on. It could be, you know, how there's a group of young parents that meet at the soccer field every Saturday while their kids are playing soccer. You know, that's an asset to explore there. So I like to think that culture and stories kind of blend through all the other assets as well. So when we look at a community from an assets perspective, we're really thinking about, again, the gifts of individuals at the heart, those associations or networks of relationships as the next layer. And local institutions are not at the center of the community. They are on the outer edges, supporting those gifts, supporting those associations. Okay. And when we think of this from when we think of things from an ABCD perspective, ultimately, this is one of the questions I like to reflect on. And are we building on and strengthening those natural community relationships and networks, or are we replacing them? So I like to tell the story of Jack, who worked with me at one of the places I used to work. And Jack had a job coach. Jack had lots of skills, lots of talents, was very helpful in our office. One day I went to ask Jack to do a task for me, asked him to do a task. And his job developer, a well-meaning, lovely young person, walked right between us. I mean, physically walked right between us, and with a big smile said, "What would you like Jack to do?" And I had to say, "Well, I will tell him as soon as you move out of the way." Here was someone who was dying to help, wanted to help Jack, wanted to help me, but that person was getting in the way of a natural relationship. So I use that example because I know so many people there can relate to this. And again, well-meaning person trying to do their best, but they got in the way. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide here. It'll be included in the PowerPoint, but there's a lot of very important, sometimes subtle, but very important differences between a social service model, which is what we all may have, somehow participate in the work that we all do, and a community building model that's based on assets. One of the things, there's a couple I want to really point out in here. One is power. It's the third from the bottom. So the power in any social service model actually comes from credentials. I happen to have a master's in science and social work. So it's an MSSW. I like to think of it as super social worker. And that bestows upon me a certain power within the system. But power in communities really, again, comes from that R word, a different kind of R word here, relationship, right? And it really is about thinking about who has the power and who has control over what's happening in their lives. And, everything else in here, it's pretty much, all the stuff we've been talking about here. So again, we'll just, I'll leave the slide in there so you can look at it, and feel free to let me know if you have questions about that. So I'm going to jump into talking about individuals and their gifts. This is the first asset that we think about. And as my friend, you'll hear me quote a couple people here, or one particular person here when we talk about gifts. And it's a colleague of mine named Bruce Anderson, who's the director of the Core Gift Institute. That'll be on your resource list as well. And he always says, it's not a gift unless it's given. So we want to think about why gifts matter. Why do individual people and their gifts matter to us? And this is what Bruce has to say about it. People committed to gifts almost always see themselves as part of a larger movement in the world that doesn't pit the needs of our environment, strong communities, and individuals against each other, but as a unified whole moving forward together. Our collective gifts contribute an essential piece to the puzzle of living together. I love that last line. Our collective gifts contribute an essential piece to the puzzle of living together. So we're going to do a little exercise, and I want you all to pull out a piece of paper someplace and a pen. And I'm going to walk you through a worksheet that Bruce shared with me about gifts. And then we're going to put you into groups to talk about what you experienced going through this worksheet. All right, so be prepared. You're going to be grouped up after this. And I'll even tell you what the question is. What are you experiencing doing this worksheet about yourself? This is about yourself, okay? So we're going to start from the top. Well, we're going to start with the idea of gifts basket. What I carry, I can give. So, and this, I'll send you a copy of this in your resources too. So the idea is that we all have gifts. And if we have talents and gifts, then we can share those with people. You know, we benefit and our communities benefit. So at the top, we have gifts of passion. What gets me out of bed in the morning? And it could be anything. It could be your work, but I don't want you to limit yourself to your work. Okay, it's sometimes just saying my work is kind of an easy answer. So if you're going to say your work, say what about it? What are you truly passionate about that if you knew you were going to do it that day, you would get out of bed and jump and do it? So write that down on your piece of paper. I think, believe it or not, one of the things I would write for that is being out in nature. That one always jumps out at me because I live in the woods on an island. I didn't mention I live on Washington Island. And if I know that I can get outside that day, that will get me out of bed. That will get me really excited. All right, so the next one down, gifts of wisdom. What beliefs or principles have I learned from important people in my life? So I won't tell you who the person is, but the example I give is I learned from a person in my life about the importance of taking care of myself. I tend to be that chronic caretaker I mentioned earlier. So I've learned about, and I still am learning about how important it is to take care of myself. You know, there's that funny old saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But the degree of wisdom in there is that if I don't take care of myself, I can't be there for other people. So for me, that's my gift of wisdom. Okay. Gifts of creating. These are things we can do with our hands. We can help people in different ways. I love to bake. You know, that's something I really love to do. And I became gluten-free a number of years ago. So I've started learning how to make different things that are gluten-free that anybody can eat. So that's pretty exciting. But this could be anything that you create. Gifts of knowledge. Do you know about something, some information that you could share with someone else? What are your gifts of knowledge? You know, I know about ABCD. I know about what it's like to live in a very rural area. I don't know as much as people have lived here for all their lives, but after 3.5 years, and we had a relationship with this place long before that, I know something about that. I also know something about organizing stuff. That tends to be another gift in my own knowledge. And then the last part at the bottom is gifts of passages. This one was added, Bruce told me that this was added to this sheet as he was working with a real diverse groups of folks. You know, he wasn't working with your typical middle class, you know, type folks, you know, urban dwellers, if you will. He was starting to work with lots of different groups of folks. And he found that some of the more traditional cultures that he worked with really talked a lot about passages and challenges that people have gone through in their life. So this gift of passages, you know, what I can do better, or what I care about more after going through a challenging story or a challenging situation. So for me, the challenge was when I was quite young and still in college, my father experienced a really major stroke, a brain bleed. We didn't know if he was going to live or die for like a month. And then it took him a long, long time to recover from that. And he never did fully physically recover from it. But that was really challenging for me as a young adult, trying to finish school. I was in education, trying to learn about being a teacher. And the gift that I learned from that was the value of my family and how important it was for me to make time for my family, no matter what else was going on. So think about your own challenges in your own life and the gift that you got from that. So the caution here is I just showed you this beautiful handout that you could use with folks, and it's a great tool, right? But Bruce cautions us. He said, gift discovery is not a solution. It's not a new planning template. It's not something for institutions to grab hold of and run with, turning gift discovery into a commodity that can be inserted into a life with a new action plan. We are not looking at creating more systems, or I love that, into a commodity. So keep that in mind as you think about how you might use that tool. So we're going to go into breakout rooms here. And Shannon or Molly, could you copy this question and put it in the chat for folks? Thank you so much, Shannon. We're going to put you in groups of 3. So we're going to have pretty small groups here. And you're going to talk about what did you learn about yourself during this exercise, and how does this shape how you think about helping other people identify and share their gifts. And there's 3 of you, and you're going to have a good 15 minutes in your group. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask Shannon to put you all into groups. So, great. All right. Who would like to share what their group talked about? How about if I just call on somebody randomly, and if you would rather not share, you can say pass, okay? How about Maria Kickstra? You're on mute, you're on mute.
Hello, I will say pass. We had a great conversation.
You had a great conversation. Is somebody else in your group want to talk about?
Monica,
somebody else in your group?
And I were the only 2, and we've had a great conversation. It's nice to really get to know her and see her perspective.
All right. All right. How about Kim Curley? Kim, do you want to tell us what your group talked about?
Yeah, we all agreed that it was a great exercise, and I think we're all considering trying to somehow use it right away, whether it's with our colleagues or with our consumers, to see, you know, if it would be a benefit. I think one thing we also talked about was because sometimes we struggle getting individuals to realize what their strengths are, because everybody likes to focus on their negative. That maybe like after their situation, you do this, and then maybe after they get a job, for instance, and they actually start working, to like do it again and see if they feel like their gifts have changed, you know, that they're able to offer. We had a really good conversation.
You know, it's interesting. I'm interested in your comments about, you know, how hard it is for people to talk about their gifts. And I think there's a couple of things about that. I think that in many ways, when people are really tied into and dependent upon a service system, they're reluctant to talk about their gifts. Or in some cases, parents are reluctant to talk about their kids' gifts, because there's that worry. If I tell you what my kid is good at, or if I tell you how I'm talented at something, you might take a service away, right? So I say that we have systematized people to think in terms of deficits. Now, having said that, I just want to share a quick story about how one time I was meeting with a group of People First folks, and we were sitting in a circle. And usually I don't start out meetings this way, but this one I started out by saying, tell me your name, tell me where you live, and tell me something you're good at. And boy, it was like bam, 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 bam. And by like the third or fourth person, they were organizing a potluck because there were so many cooks in the group, and they were planning a party at somebody's house. And they were just, it was like magical to see this just simple question, people naturally connecting with each other. And when I said to them, why you guys were amazing, and that was so fast, and you were so excited about this. I'm like, why was this so exciting, and how come you were so good at this? You guys just really had this stuff. And one person piped up and said, well, we couldn't believe you asked. I couldn't believe, she was talking for herself. I couldn't believe you asked us this because nobody ever asked us this. And it was so exciting to tell you something that I'm good at, because nobody ever asks me. And I think that's part of it too, right? There's this system that has systematized people that everything is focused around their deficits and what they can't do, and fixing them, fixing how they live or what they're doing. And the idea of focusing on positive, a gift or a talent is really exciting to the group I met with. And that really struck me powerfully. Let's have maybe one other person tell me something about themselves, about what their group talked about. I can call on somebody, but if somebody wants to just jump in there, that's fine too. How about Sue Mahaney, is it? Right.
Well, we definitely had a theme going of organizing and helping others with organization in the workplace or even other, but sharing that information as we find it, and then anticipating needs to keep everything running smoothly. But that was a theme between, I think everybody felt that way.
Yeah, about your own gifts?
Yeah.
You're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And did your group get to talk about how you might incorporate this into the work you do or with the people that you work with?
Yeah, they actually contributed, some examples of sharing YouTube videos that with other colleagues and people that they knew that helped with organization. And, just getting excited and getting that word out there with that. But then another one mentioned, that she's always kind of watching to make sure that, people literally have, tangible item that in the office that they need, and making sure, anticipating, looking at that inventory, making sure it's there, or say if the server goes down, jumping in to make sure that that's taken care of, but just always being there for other people and anticipating those needs and watching, what can I do to help?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Sue. I see there's a couple comments in the chat too that I want to point out. Carrie said, we talked about our gifts, who and what life experiences help develop our gifts, and how we can use our gifts in our practice to support the same development in the individuals we work with. So how do we, and I think that's always key, the people that you work with are more like you than they're different, right? So I always find that this is a really good experience to see how you feel about this experience, how what it is about you thinking about your gifts. David shared that their group felt a little nervous about being asked about their gifts, and maybe a little bit reluctant to talk about them. And I love when people bring this up, because it's almost always brought up when we talk about this. There is an element of trust here, right? There is an element of risk taking, and just being able to understand how people might be reluctant or anxious about talking about their gifts. So you can't, in a lot of cases, you can't just sit down and say, okay, I've got this form, and we're going to go through this form, and you're going to tell me all about yourself. You have to think about that relationship piece again, right? That how do I have a relationship here? Okay, we're going to move on here, but just be assured that the worksheet, a copy of the worksheet will go out with the resources as well, in the follow-up email, and that'll be in about a week from now. just so you know. Okay, let me go back here. Okay, great. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about associations. That was one of the words I used earlier today. And again, I say these are usually like those formal or informal networks of relationships between people. These are one of the key building blocks of communities. These are all over the place and you don't know it sometimes. So what are they? First of all, they're any kind of group of 2 or more community residents who are joined together around a common activity, often sharing a common vision and goal. There might be a small paid staff, but it's the members that create the vision and engage in the work to achieve the goal. So let me give you some examples. Oh, I got a whole page of examples. It might be pretty small print on yours, but I'll try to talk through these a little bit with you. So these are things like 4-H groups. You know, my daughter used to be in 4-H, which, you know, a youth organization. And within the 4-H group that she belonged to, there were actually 2 associations. The first was the kids themselves, right? Because the kids formed a group. They were a little bit more formalized. They elected a president. They elected a vice president. They elected a chief of games. That was always my favorite, chief of games. They did all that stuff. While the kids were having their meetings, the family members were in the back of the room, clustered together saying, okay, now who's going to drive on the next field trip? Lisa, are you going to do gingerbread houses again this year, or cake decorating? And who's going to do the ice fishing with the kids this year? And who's going to drive where and do what? And what kids are going to camp this summer? You know, we were back there. We weren't a formal group. Our kids were the more formal group, but we had a common interest. We had a common desire. So other examples are things like book clubs and political groups. So there's those common interest groups, right? There's those community service groups, you know, like service clubs. It could be like Lions or Elks, or I would say there are any of those animal groups, you know, League of Women Voters, fraternities, sororities. They could have social causes. It could be sports leagues, you know, it could be bowling teams. Church groups often have, you know, there might be church committees or choirs. Community, anytime you see a friends group, so you see friends of the museum, friends of the library, friends of the park, friends of the zoo, those are all considered associations. That gives you kind of an idea. All right, we're gonna do another one of these mentees. And this time I have 4 categories of mentee here, and you can choose as many as you like. Hold on one second while I open it up. Come on. There we go. Hold on. I have to actually open it for you to be able to add to it. Come on. Okay. And I will share my screen so you can see. And I think Shannon put the link in the chat so you can see it. And I'm gonna share that screen so you can watch it. Get stuff added to it. So thinking about the groups that you are connected to, you know, and you could put as many of these as you belong to. I love watching those little dots pop over there and cluster. All right, we have about 50 people. Oh, we still have people adding here. All right. You can still add if you're able to, but it's really interesting to me because if you look at these numbers here, what do we got? We got 39, 29, 30. Oh, still being added. 16, one more there. 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so we have at least 115, probably more in there now because people have added some more. We've had at least 115, possibly more associations that you're connected to. So think about this. This is just the people that have responded to this particular mentee, right? So, so there's a lot of different kinds of connections here that people can have. I'm gonna stop. There we go. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Oh, I guess you're not seeing my presenter view here, so I'll try and do that. Don't you love technology when it's easy? There we go. All right. So so the idea is that you connected to all these associations. So why do we care? Why do we care about these associations? Why does it matter that we have all these groups, informal clubs, activities, whatever, in our communities? We're going to stick in breakout rooms this time. We're going to do a shorter time. And I want you to think about, why do associations matter? How might they help us make connections in communities? And I want you to be concrete and use examples with each other. And you get bonus points if you use the word relationships in your discussion. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I think Molly's going to, or Shannon, one of them is going to put you in groups. Have fun. All right, looks like we got everybody back. All right, this time what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to the chat and chat in how you might help, how knowing associations helps us to make connections. Like what's the point of knowing about associations? Why do we care about associations? Any way you want to answer that question or those questions. Build relationships. Okay, Lana, you get a bonus point for using the word relationship. Oh, now you're all going to say it. Two heads are better than one, networking. One of the people provides purposeful connections, which grows relationships. Thanks, Sarah. A little more detail on that relationship one. Here's one. I feel associations matter because you learn other connections, ways to support those we serve, also work with like-minded individuals who see the greater value of connections, relationship, and community. Having many heads, sometimes something together, and allow for more networking and building of relationships, connections to making change, helps with new connections, ability to access information and resources, build relationships. There's more specific about relationships that I was looking for. They build relationships with others who have common values. Remember, we said associations are people who share a common interest or theme. And if you have someone that you are supporting who loves art, well, getting them together with other artists, maybe they like to create art, or maybe they just like to view art, but getting them together with an arts group will really allow them to share their interests, share their passion in a setting where everybody's doing that around art, right? And there's a role for everyone who cares about art. And yes, it absolutely decreases social isolation. So there's a lot of benefits to joining associations and knowing about associations. Let me play with my screen again and see if I can make this work. Hold on just one second. I'm going to do presenter view. Let me just switch this out here. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So when we talk about association, so lots of good points in there. And on concrete terms, you know, here's some of the things. So first of all, we talked about how everybody has gifts, right? That includes all the individual members of any association. So I have a book club, right? I belong to a book club. Our common interest is books. We are passionate about books, but we've got someone in there who has local connections and really knows a lot of people. We've got someone who in there who knows a lot about science, let's say, or someone who has a business, right? So there's a lot of individual capacities beyond the thing that brings that group together. Then there's that power of relationships. You know, everybody who used the word relationships gets brownie points from me today, because when we come together in association, we have a shared interest, a shared passion. And what are relationships based on other than this shared interest, right? Really powerful relationships come from what we can share with each other. I love this. Social networking was social media before it existed. So, you know, this idea that we come together, we can network with people and connect with people and have that power of relationships. We share interests and goals with somebody else. You know, if we're part of the Friends of the Library group, we all care about our library and we're all excited to do stuff for our library. Or Friends of the Nature Center. I have a friend who just got a job with a nature center in Milwaukee, and she said one of the most exciting thing about this nature center is the strong friends group that's involved and how they all really care passionately about that nature center. There's also these local connections, right? Who knows who and how do we get connected? We find employment leads and opportunities. Could be somebody in my book club runs the local bakery and is looking for somebody to work at the her bakery. There's leadership potential and leadership opportunities. When you are in an association, there's a chance for you to say, yeah, I would like to lead the group next time. I would like to lead our book discussion. I would like to take care of setting up the chairs for our meeting, whatever, you know. But it's not like it's limited to certain people because they're paid to be there. You know, this associations are primarily people who are not paid to be there. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of local knowledge, there's a lot of commitment from folks. So this stuff is all really important stuff. So real powerful are associations. So then we're going to talk about the third asset, which is institutions. And I like to think specifically about local institutions. Sometimes if you have, there are statewide, nationwide institutions, but the farther you get away from a community, the less of a connection it has and the less it's able to recognize the gifts and talents of individuals. Remember, that's the heart of our communities, those gifts and talents of individuals. So I like to use a triangle to represent institutions because it's really a lot about power and who has power in that organization or in that group. You know, that chart before that, let me just back up one without the triangle. You'll see this is basically an org chart or an organizational chart, right? And we're so used to like the people at the top being the people in power, and the farther down you go the org chart, the less power folks have. So that's why we use a triangle when we think about institutions. When we talk about associations or we talk about communities, we often use a circle, just so you know that. So what are institutions? Organizations that are structured to produce desired goods and services that are used by clients, consumers, or customers. They provide consistency, reliability, sustainability, efficiency. They're really good at doing a lot of the same thing for all the people they serve. It's challenging to be individualized within institutions. So if you, I am hazarding a guess that most, if not all of you on our call work for an institution. And if you do, you are challenged to figure out how to individualize things because institutions are set up for the masses. They're set up to be the same for everyone. The basic three types of institutions are nonprofit sector or agencies, right? Organizations. Nonprofits are institutions. There are people that are at that top of that triangle that are in charge. Businesses, even if you're a business of one or two people, you are considered an institution. I run a consulting firm. The only other person that works with me is my husband, but we are part of those institutions. We're paid to do the work that we do. And then we have public sector or government. That's local government, town or city, county, state, national. Those are even worldwide institutions we can have too. Again, the closer to the people themselves, the better. Some examples: schools, libraries, law enforcement, colleges, universities, trade schools, health and human service agencies, service providers, and again, nonprofits, private businesses. You know, we had this list. I'm going to go back to the asset list, or what associations can offer back here. We talked about all these things that associations can offer. I want you to pop back into the chat and tell me what you think institutions offer. All right. So hop in the chat and tell me, what do you think institutions can offer? Other than the thing they're designed to provide. Let's do that. Other than the thing they're designed to provide. So if we have a library, libraries provide books. And they provide, in this day and age, they also provide, you know, oh, you guys are jumping in here. This is great. So what are the things that they provide? There's some real concrete things they can provide. So besides things like stability and support, that's pretty general. I want you guys to be more specific and think about what are they, if we're thinking about a library, for example, what could a library provide that has nothing to do with lending out books? Think about it in terms of COVID, what libraries are doing. Oh, here we go, classes and demonstrations. That's a very concrete thing. They could do that. Meeting space, absolutely. So meeting, gathering spaces. Support groups, they might organize support groups at the library. Yep, it's a safe environment. We have, you know, there's a lot of people who feel like they can go to the library because it's a safe place to be out in the community. Programs, they can offer programs, absolutely. Access to technology, absolutely. Warmth and shelter, study space. There you go. Now you're getting real concrete here. This is great. So it has more to do, so they can offer more than the thing they're designed to offer. And I'll give you some examples here that overlap with what you guys have talked about there. Almost all institutions have some sort of building, right? They have a facility. You know, here in our tiny community, you know, there's a gym that is part of the community center. Well, it's also used by the school. It's also used by members of the community. Our recreation center has a pool. The school doesn't have a pool, so they bring their kids over to go swimming there, or people from the community can go and swim there. So there's the physical stuff. There's equipment, like at our libraries, again, we have computers, we have printers. You know, there's stuff that we can use. I've heard some amazing examples lately about libraries that were lending out hotspots, right, for internet. So in some communities where there's a lot of people who can't afford internet, they're lending out hotspots. The funniest one I heard recently was in Madison at the library. They were lending out passes, you know, those, they call them B-bikes or red bikes, where you can rent them on the street and just use them. They're lending out passes to use those for free. They have some sort of agreement with that. So that was pretty interesting to me. Another example is we have here in our community, we're a tiny community, very tourist oriented, right? We have one business owner here on the island who in our community who has cottages. And when COVID started, it was off, you know, and school, it was during COVID, but it was when school was starting and all the kids were going to do internet-based learning rather than in-person learning. And he had these cottages that were set up for internet, had internet services provided. And so he offered to families, if you don't have internet in your home, they could assign a family to each of his cottages. They would be separate from everyone else, but they would have internet, and they could use his internet at no cost by being in those cottages. That's a great example of a business owner who that wasn't part of what his business scheme was. And yet he was using one of his business assets to benefit community members. Often institutions have materials, purchasing power. This idea that, if my little book group wants to get a bunch of books and we all went online and bought them, we might not be all able to afford the books. Or if we have a project that we want to do with books, we might not be able to afford to buy those books to give to kids, for example. And yet if we partnered up with a business, we might be able to get tie into their purchasing power because they might get a discounted rate. Employment capacity. All these institutions employ people, right? Training and development capacity. I always said I used to work at Department of Health Services at 1 West Wilson, and we had an incredible computer lab in the basement. And I always wondered what would happen if we made that available to people. We as employees got training through that, but what if we made it available to people in the community? Other assets, all the employees at an institution have talents and skills. Financial resources, most institutions have some sort of financial resources, political clout, good connections, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, here's Cherry shared a great example that a community center who canceled all their programming due to COVID, but then they began offering their space for virtual learning. So there's lots of possibilities through institutions, right? And local institutions are usually the most powerful because those usually are people from that community. And you'll especially see that, again, if you look in rural areas, I always say in rural areas, we are it. So if we want something, we can't access something, there are no big cities near us to try to access it. In the city, you have trouble getting things, but, there's always sort of a bigger entity around that you can look to, even if it's difficult to access, you could at least look to them. In rural areas, we are it. We're it. There's nobody going to come rescue us. So if we want something, we got to figure it out. So our local institutions are run by us. And so it's up to us to figure out how we can relate to our local communities in ways that go beyond what we're designed to do. Oh, this is great. Samantha said their public library in their town allows free printing for career development purposes. Able to print resumes for a job interview, all for free. That's amazing. I love libraries. Don't you love libraries? They're so great. So thanks for those examples, folks. So when we think of institutions, local institutions, and we think of associations, they're really two different tools for community problem solving, right? They're really two different ways of thinking about what we want to do. And next time we're going to talk about, these just kind of compare those, but we're going to talk about how do you figure out which tools to use? When do you think institutions and when do you think associations and when do you look at those various things? So we're going to do something we call the 3 questions. So this is my teaser for the next session. We're going to do something called the 3 questions. We're going to talk about motivation to act and what motivates people to act. Then we're going to talk about some asset mapping and how do you use asset mapping and why is it different from a resource directory? Because it's totally different animal. And I always, but in terms of the 2 tools, associations and institutions, the question we always ask is, why do we care whether something is an association or an institution? And one of the examples I use is I ask people normally, if I was there in person, I'd ask you, what's a faith community? If you think about your local faith community, is it an association or an institution? I'll give you a moment to think about that. You can chime in the chat if you want to tell me if you think it's an association or an institution. What do you think they are? Faith communities. Oh, I got a bullet. That's all I got. Everybody else is thinking, oh, institutions that provide associations, different aspects of it fill both, can serve as either due to their assets they offer. You know, lots of good points here, both, yep. So one of the things that I think is really a determinant is who gets to decide. In other words, who, you know, what's the power look like? So you can have faith communities on both ends of the spectrum. And I'll give you examples of that. If we think about the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, that's a really good example of an institution. You know, they are designed, you know, the ultimate person in charge is the Pope, right? And so so the Roman Catholic Church is a really good example of an institution. It's more formal, you know, it's more structured. There's the power orientation really is higher at the top of that triangle. At the other end, we think of like a Quaker group where it's totally informal. Anybody can step up. Everybody has to agree on things. You know, it's much more casual. And the truth is, most faith communities fall someplace in between. With, as someone said, aspects of any faith community can be either more institutional or more associational. So you may have a more institutional faith community in terms of, you know, the power structure and how it works. And yet, on the other end of things, you may have a Bible study group or a faith, you know, some kind of study group within that church that is totally associational. Nonprofits, you know, are really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about those since I moved to a rural area. We in ABCD typically classify nonprofits as institutions, yet in my rural community, our nonprofits really act more as associations. I'll give you an example that I'm on the board for our local art and nature center. And we do have paid staff. We have 2 very part-time paid staff, and then we get some summer teen helpers in our programs and stuff. But the decisions, everything we do is determined by the board and the community members, right? It's more informal. We elect people into leadership. Really, the power of that organization is based on people within the community who step up and say, I want to get involved and I want to help run things, figure out things. And that's pretty true of a lot of the ways that rural communities operate. Is you're less likely to have very formal institutions and less formal institutions and slightly more formal associations. So sort of a blend of those, if you will. Okay. So that is the big chunk of what I wanted to share with you today. I've already sort of given you that. I'm gonna stop sharing my slide for a minute. I've given you sort of that teaser about what we'll be doing next time, when we'll be talking more about connecting with people, more about relationships, you know, that magical word, and thinking about some real concrete tools to examine and to think about using both within your organization, as well as you think about how people connect out in the community. And, you know, all of this, of course, is set within the context of COVID, which really brings up for us the idea of risk and who gets to decide about risk and how much risk people can tolerate and how can we support risk taking. And, you know, just think about how people are able to create relationships and have more meaningful lives and be more connected in their communities. So we'll be talking about a lot of that kind of stuff next time. But right now I'm open for questions. If you want to put one in the chat, and then I can either read your question or I can call on you and we can talk about it. So who's got a question for me?
Or if you have any comments you want to make about your experiences or.
There have been some good stories shared in here. All right, let's see, what do we got here? I just let you know the next. I think it's October 28th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, let me double check here. And then I know there was a question back earlier, and I'm not sure if you addressed it, Deb, was people were wondering if they could get that worksheet.
Yes, I did. I did say yes. I
Okay.
will include the worksheet along with the resources.
So let's see, I will confirm our next.
Yep. Molly says it's October 28th at 1.
Yes, that's right. We moved to a Thursday.
It'll be on a Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, Thursday, 1 o'clock. It should be the same link, correct, Molly?
Yep, same link.
And
we'll be sending out a PDF of the presentation and resources, a list of resources and the handout.
And I will be sure to put on my calendar to send out the Zoom link, earlier in the week to everybody so they have it.
Yeah. Oh, Carrie, really interesting comment. During the pandemic, there seems to be more interest in developing new relationships between institutions and associations. Do you want to say more about that, Carrie? I'd love to talk with you a little bit about this. I think that's really I've heard this too. So do you want to say something about it? I don't know where you are in the picture.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know. I just was kind of thinking as you were talking that it's been interesting to see, as the months go by, especially like, when I talked about like the community center, when there were like institutions or associations that weren't able to continue doing what they were doing because of the pandemic, and how they found new ways to do things, or, we can't do it on our own. Maybe we can partner with this institution or this association, and we can either do what we were doing or we can do something different. So, I just was kind of processing that as you were talking and starting to kind of think of some examples. So yeah, it's been interesting. So if anything good can come from the pandemic, maybe, some of these things can continue after.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. A lot of things did change during the pandemic. And I think what you're talking about is just one of them, right? I mean, even things like telehealth and telework, which, definitely benefits people who have difficulty getting out of their homes and want to connect with their medical providers or want to have jobs and have meaningful employment. But certainly in terms of communities, you are absolutely right. I've been hearing a lot of stories about institutions that are really thinking differently and thinking about their relationship to local associations, to local individuals, like the story I just shared about the business owner who let families use his cottages during the off season because he had internet. It's really interesting. And then if we think about that, especially because of relationships, right? The relationships that people have, I think there's been a lot of people who have really started to examine the importance of relationships in their lives, and how this is such a, when you can't go and just hug people, or you can't just go socialize the way you used to, it makes you reevaluate. Yes, somebody else, Mabel, Mabel pointed out that, you know, there's been more development in connecting and developing online, more Facebook groups, family Zooms, online concerts. You know, it's a new day when my 84-year-old mother asks me, when can we Zoom? You know, and it's ways of people being connected to each other. Suddenly these connections, I think in a lot of ways, we may have valued them before, but now we're more aware of how much we value these connections and relationships. So Samantha asks about, will relationships differ based on if they are an institution or an association? And I think the short answer is yes. But we'll talk about that. We can talk about that more. I think part of the reason I say yes is because so much of relationships depends on sort of that nature of that relationship. So if I'm connected with a service provider, somebody who works for a service provider because they provide me services, you know, that relationship, there's an element of I'm dependent upon you for my services. That relationship is going to be different than the relationship I have with my next door neighbor who volunteers to come over and cut my grass. You know, it's not a paid relationship. So I think that is another aspect of it, right? Another way of thinking about that. So yes, we can talk about that more next time. Yep. You know, I want to, you know, I'm realizing it's real close to our time to close out. So I'm going to close with two things. I'm going to close with a quote and a quick story. And I'm going to tell you a story about my 84-year-old mom who, by the way, I always ask her permission if I can share her stories. And she loves when I share her stories. Her name is Irene, and she lives in a little town. And Irene can drive, but she doesn't drive that much anymore. She just drives certain places. And the beginning of COVID was very hard on her because she lived alone and she's a social butterfly. And she's always like wanting to be at the grandkids and great grandkids events and birthday parties and stuff like that. And so it was very hard on her because she has a lot of health concerns. And there were a lot of ways that we thought about helping her maintain connections with family members. At the same time, there were neighbors who worked on maintaining their normal relationships with her as much as possible. So she has a couple that live across the road from her who have always been really key people to her. They've always had a really strong relationship. And this was a case of us just getting out of their way because they were willing to still pick up her groceries. And they, you know, remember at the beginning of COVID, you had to wipe all your groceries off. They would wipe everything down. They would put them on the porch. They'd call her on the phone. They'd talk to her through the windows. They worked on maintaining that relationship because that relationship was already there. And our job was to get out of the way as family members. At the same time, we were trying to help mom maintain her relationships with all the grandkids and great grandkids. So we did things like we had what we called the 12 days of Christmas, where a different part of our family went over every day. We have a lot of little kids. She has a lot of great grandkids. A different part of our family go over every day and do something outside her house, sing her a Christmas carol, bring her a treat, leave stuff in her mailbox. Sometimes they just wave, you know, all kinds of things like that. So, you know, again, that importance of relationships, I think a lot of people in our family took those relationships with my mom for granted before. And now, you know, once COVID hit, everyone started to realize how important these were. So with that, I am going to close with my final quote, which will be in your PDF. And it's from Sandra Day O'Connor, who I believe was the first woman on the Supreme Court. Yeah, that's right. She was the first woman on the Supreme Court. But she said, "We don't accomplish anything in this world alone. Whatever happens is the result of the whole tapestry of one's life and all the weavings of individual threads from one to another that create something." So with that, I'm going to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Deb. So
Yeah, it
thank
was
you
lots
very
of
much.
fun.
We will see you all very soon. And in the meantime, I will send a PDF out of the presentation. I'll send the worksheet and the recording as well. And if you have any questions, you know, I'll copy Deb on that email. So you have her email and you can always get in touch with her.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.